Hi, welcome to our Election 43 show. My name is Brett James.
And I'm Michael Edwards. Nice to have you with us today.
We've, for those who've been tuning in over the course of the summer, we've had a regular show focusing on the issues, the politics, the machinations behind the scenes of what's happening related to the campaign. And now for this show is the first one actually in the campaign, and as it kicked off this week. So today we want to talk a little bit about the first few days, the performance, what we've been seeing, how much it matters, and some of the trends that we're seeing in the early days. Michael, first off, let's talk a little bit about what we've seen in terms of campaign launch and how each of the leaders have handled themselves. Maybe what you're seeing from a digital perspective. Give me a sense.
Yeah, for sure. So, in our show last week, we reviewed the new advertisements from each of the major parties and their slogans as well. And we saw, differences and nuances that became very clear when you look at what the parties are putting out there, particularly on a national scale in terms of how they're approaching the electorate and how they're approaching their overall strategy for this election. When we recorded that episode, it was right before we had confirmation of the date of the writ. And then sure enough, a few days later, we get right into the writ period. But it's I think it's the right amount of length for this campaign, about 40 days. It's not so long that people become disinterested, that, media is exhausted by the end of the campaign, that we just don't want to vote by the end of the campaign because we're tired of all of it.
Not like 2015.
No, but it's long enough that each of the parties have some flexibility that if, a bomb goes off in their backyard, so to speak, there's still an opportunity to do some damage control and salvage the race. So it's both short and long. It's kind of that middle spot. But all of the leaders have hit the ground running. They all announced and kicked off their campaigns the very first day of the official election period, all in different parts of the country. And their approach, it's carrying over. They're all using digital primarily and social media as a means to go directly to the voter. And I know we're going to talk about the debate from last night shortly, but notably one of the participants was not there. But I think it kind of plays into that trend. People are on digital and social media. Supporters who they need to engage and acquire are accessible in those channels to them. So rather than, maybe appearing at a debate, you can do a live conference with supporters behind you and get your message out that way instead.
Right.
We'll see more of that, I think, over the next 5 weeks or so.
Or Reddit, Ask Me Anything, and invite thousands of people to come and join
exactly.
you. Right? It's an entirely different way of reaching voters. Yes, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, the days when there was maybe one televised debate or two in a campaign, and the majority of the country might make it a priority to tune in, and it really could affect the outcome of a campaign. I think those days are gone, and it does speak to that decision of Prime Minister Trudeau not to attend last night's Maclean's debate. I've been asked a few times by clients and others, like, why wouldn't he? Why is he not going to be there? And my answer is there's really no upside for him. With very few people actually watching it, why go there and knowing you're going to be a punching bag on SNC-Lavalin and other issues when he's got really nowhere to go but down. And so others are looking to exceed expectations. Andrew Scheer, I think, in particular, because they need to improve their standing. They want to seize the opportunity, show that they are actually prime ministerial, that they're ready for the job. So this is sort of the debut for that and the first opportunity. And what really matters to all of them is what comes after the debate. There's a reason why they all employ teams of spinners to go out there and talk about why their candidate won. It's because the media coverage that comes from it and the social media that comes after the debate is what really drives people's impressions of what happened, because most people don't watch it. But I want to step back and talk a little bit about the launch of each campaign too. So day one, my view is the Prime Minister couldn't have had much of a rougher day for a launch of the campaign. He had chosen September 11th, and we can debate the merits or not of the date. A lot of people have been critical of taking what's a somber day of remembrance of horrible attack, obviously, in New York and beyond, but chose that date and took the hits from it, announced it at Rideau Hall when he went to see the Governor General, took nothing but questions on SNC-Lavalin and Bill 21 in Quebec. And you could see the frustration on the Prime Minister's voice because, of course, it's in his face. It's meant to be a very positive day, a big launch, come out, as you said, hit the ground running, and nothing but rah-rah. It was a pretty rough start, and his day ended in Vancouver, having attended an event, and his campaign bus ran into the wing of the airplane. So, I mean, metaphorically and literally, it was a pretty rough day, I think. The other element of not attending the debate is the next day, he had a good day because he had everything, all of media to himself. The other three major candidates were all in debate prep. Mm-hmm. They weren't attending events. They weren't making any announcements. So I think that's another part of the calculation why he wasn't at the debate. So it allowed him to recover on day 2 of the campaign. Mr. Scheer started off in Trois-Rivières, which obviously indicates how important they view Quebec to be, but also that there's a number of ridings there, in particular rural ridings and around Quebec City, where they believe they can make major gains. Finished it in Vaughan at a significant rally, and again, 905 is key battleground for all of them. Jagmeet Singh, in my view, exceeded expectations in the first couple of days. He's had a pretty rough time in general, not a lot of presence, not a lot of great media coverage. Still suffers, I think, significantly from poor organization or mm-hmm. lack of organization, not enough money to mount a real proper campaign. But he's been doing very well in his early announcements and in the optics of what they've been presenting. I think highlighted by an announcement coverage this morning of his announcement that they're going to cap cell phone bills for Canadians. Now, how that works and how realistic that is, all parties have been rumored to come forward with some type of policy in that vein, because everybody knows that Canada, relative to other parts of the world, Canadians feel like they really get hosed on their cell phone bills. Politicians are responding. But the optics of how he presented it and the media coverage that came from it, really solid. Elizabeth May, I don't know what you've been saying, Michael, but I mean, the days leading into the campaign in the first couple, candidate who said he was a sovereigntist, she said, no, there's no sovereigntists in my caucus. He said, yeah, I am. Another where she was asked about whether she would allow them to bring forward any private members' bills about abortion. Same kind of question Andrew Scheer got. She said she would allow them to do so, which is actually a position that I don't think a lot of her party members wanted to hear about. So she's had a lot of difficulties getting what would be her main messages out, because she's been, I think, in some off-the-cuff remarks during mm-hmm. interviews, getting herself into a lot of trouble. Yeah. Self-inflicted wounds.
I mean, I would agree with that totally. And for both the NDP and Green Party, this is kind of the time to shine, right? I know a lot of people have been critical of Jagmeet Singh as leader. I'm asking kind of, where is he? I haven't heard from Jagmeet. I haven't really seen the NDP. But that's also a little bit the nature of third-party status. It's difficult to really get that exposure. Particularly in a majority government where third party plays virtually no role, and where a lot of, frankly, NDP policy and Liberal policy, I feel, over the last 4 or 5 years under Justin Trudeau's leadership, there's been a little bit of overlap on issues. So it's difficult, and now that spotlight's on him, I feel that he's doing a reasonably good job of shining. They have their campaign slogan. I think it's "In it for you." I'm pretty sure. Right. I don't have it handy. Yep. But kicking things off with this cell phone bill announcement is a great way to show, we're taking those little things that we all hate that make life unaffordable, and we're doing something that the government maybe before they're in bed with the big telco companies. We're in it for you, and it's not a new strategy. The NDP here in Ontario have always been hard on any type of kind of universal billing, something that we all get, whether it's hydro rates or auto insurance. And so
cable bills.
Yeah, cable bills on a federal stage, having that platform and ability to say and do something there, that's going to resonate with some Canadians, particularly those who really feel the impact of increasing cell phone bills. And it's a card that's been played successfully. I mean, the Conservatives under Stephen Harper really used the CRTC to address some issues about the cable monopoly or duopoly and give consumers more choice and flexibility there. So I see the approach being proven not just on the left side of the spectrum, but across the board when reaching some voters. And I just think the debates are another opportunity for Jagmeet to really get out there and shine. And with the spotlight on there in terms of Elizabeth May, we're really seeing the difference, I think, between the NDP and the Green Party and just how big of a leap it is to go from fourth party to third party. And I think that lack of expertise and organization and institutional kind of backbone is going to be a big factor in separating those two parties. But make no mistake, they're both way behind the leading two parties. Neither of them are particularly competitive. But I guess, I don't know, it raises a question, and I'd be curious to know, Brett, from you, your opinion on what's the benchmark then for success for the NDP or the Green Party, given that this is primarily a two-party race and that threshold of seat count, if you look at the projections, is putting parties on that verge of majority potentially already amongst those two leading parties.
Well, I guess as we look at an outcome, I view that the NDP are in this campaign to try and save as many seats as they can. It's really hard to picture where growth could come from. They are trailing badly in Quebec, and their historic highs under Jack Layton, which Mulcair carried a fair bit of that same momentum through the last election or into the last election, and when even had a shot to win by some people's estimations. They've slipped so badly in Quebec that they're going to try to hang on to 1, 2, 3 seats maximum. And that means there's going to be pickups for all of the other parties in Quebec. The Bloc will gain, the Liberals will gain, the Conservatives will gain. The question is how much and where. So, if Andrew Scheer, who, trying to come from second place to form a government, one of his biggest problems is the performance of the NDP. Traditionally, Conservatives have needed a strong NDP to split the vote on the left. Now, in certain places, the Greens might fulfill that role, but not likely in enough ridings in enough parts of the country to make the difference of the loss of that NDP competitiveness in a lot of places. It will be a big factor in Ontario, I think, where the NDP still has some strength, and in BC, where the Greens play heavily as well. But in Ontario, Singh, I think, has less problems than he has in Quebec. He will be a factor. And so the vote splits in 905 in southwestern Ontario could end up being a real key to who wins here. And it's hard to picture a scenario at this stage in time. Elections matter, campaigns matter. That is not a minority situation for either the Liberals or the Conservatives. That's, I think, the most likely outcome here. The other thing I wanted to get to is, like, what does all of this? We're talking about the tactics, what we're seeing, what the different campaigns are deploying. But I mean, what does it really mean at the end of the day? I mean, one of the things that I'm picking up early, when you think about the way parties used to campaign, they would often roll out a platform, maybe even the beginning of the campaign, the big red book, the famous red book that the Liberals would use time and again, and often very successfully, would be the full raft of here's our campaign, and then they would go out each day and talk about a different plank to roll them out successively. We have, at this point in time, the Liberals haven't done any such thing. Of course, we know what they were doing as governing, so people generally know where they're coming from and what their priorities are, but we don't know what their specific pledges are, by and large. We have the NDP, which rolled out a full campaign platform months in advance, and frankly, as we look backwards, we'll look and see whether that was smart or not. I think the goal was to try and get people talking about them and their policies, but I'm not sure that it moved the needle. Mr. Scheer has announced a few key planks over the summer in some speeches, but they're going to roll out, I think, a formal platform. They're not doing it just yet. And Ms. May has not yet rolled out a full platform either. So point being, as campaigns have evolved, is a full platform even necessary anymore? Do people care? Are they looking for this full comprehensive package? Or are we now looking at a cobbled together set of niche issues, very targeted at certain sets of voters and in certain regions that appeal, rather than a dozen or 20 mass announcements that are going to affect everybody in the country? And I don't know if you have a view on how that plays.
One thing that I really liked that the Liberals did in 2015, if you went on their website, their platform was a very engaged and interactive experience. And it broke down dozens upon dozens, frankly, hundreds of positions on policies or issues, even if there wasn't a specific policy or we're going to do X if elected. It gave a perspective on where the party stood on a particular position or what the party's values were for Canadians on a particular position. And I mean, looking at it from my perspective, I quite like that approach. I definitely like more information. And I mean, as someone who works with a ton of different audiences, targeting them, you want to have that flexibility to be able to say to the right person, this is what we're doing on X issue that is interest to you. So I definitely, I guess, looking, if I put like a campaign hat on, it makes a lot of sense and it gives a lot of flexibility. But there's a lot of risk involved too with launching a platform and launching it too early. I've been on campaigns where that has completely backfired, where there's been miscalculations in cost or spending, and that basically leaves you dead in the water.
I'm not going to ask you which ones.
And I mean, I think one interesting thing is all of the parties are using House and government resources to have their platforms vetted and costed and have an analysis there. So having that credible party involved in costing some of this or giving an opinion, I think that that's a smart move by all campaigns and all parties to do that. And part of that process takes time. A lot of these platform documents definitely are being written right up to the last minute because the environment's changing, right? If you've started something 18 months ago and Canadians' priorities have shifted, or you've put some information out there and it hasn't tested as well as maybe you thought it would, you're going to emphasize or de-emphasize the information and the policies in the mix of that. But I mean, overall, I think it's very clear that the parties have a perspective on where they want to go and are thematically communicating that to the electorate. So whether or not they have, a 20-page document, a 5-page document, or a 200-page document, people, voters, the average just tuning in, going to listen 48 hours before I vote, I don't think it's going to impact their choice or decision making very much. So it's a strategic tool, but it's not something that Canadians sit there and expect and say, I'm waiting for the PDF version of your 2019 platform so that I can read it before I make a decision. I also think each of the parties has overall a different approach or strategy on how they're hoping to win this election. For the Liberals, it's very much continuity of the things that have worked well and celebrating the successes of what they've achieved in government over the last 4 years. And so in that regard, I don't expect very much newness, right? There's not much that they need to rewrite. I'm sure there's some history that they wish that they could unwrite. But definitely in terms of policy, their direction's pretty solidified and it's doubling down on those priorities. And that's why you need to re-elect them. And then for the Conservatives, I mean, if we're being frank and honest, policy is important, but it's really important as a contrast to the Liberals. So they're looking for voters who feel disenfranchised by Liberal policy, who disagree on things like maybe it's carbon tax and climate change policy, maybe it's just income tax issues that they're unhappy with. But more than anything, they're really hoping to attack and discredit the personality of leadership with the Liberal Party. And we see this disconnect between what's said nationally by Andrew Scheer and then what's targeted to Canadians online from the Conservative Party. So Andrew Scheer is out there branding himself in a positive way, being on the side of Canadians, promising change to make lives better. But if you go and you open up your Facebook, you're getting Justin Trudeau broke the law on this ad from the Conservative Party. So they're really banking on discrediting and bringing down trust with the current Prime Minister as their strategy. So ultimately, I don't see where policy or a series of policies is going to make the difference in terms of winning the election. So there's pros and cons on both sides of the debate, whether or not you need to have that document at the beginning of the campaign or if it comes at some point toward the end as a culmination of everything you've done.
To your point about how, the conservative, the television ads are, meant to be that positive, aspirational, this is what I want for the country. My view is, because television is still really important, some other forms of media have taken a back seat in terms of relative importance. That's your opportunity, especially when you're introducing a leader that people still don't necessarily know, haven't paid too much attention. So you're introducing him. It's got to be positive. I'm a guy who wants to fight for you. I want you to feel confident that I'm ready to be Prime Minister. But you in the business of targeting and digital communications, then as you said, you open up your Facebook, you're getting a negative ad about Trudeau. Well, that's partly because of your own profile, and
Sure.
they know who they're talking to.
Yeah.
But they need the broad swath of general impression of Canadians to be very positive. But then they're going to target and say, "Hey, you, Michael, hopefully you're going to vote for us this time." And we want to remind you what's been happening with Trudeau, right? So I think that I don't see it as a dichotomy. I see it as two natural extensions of what they need to do and the way they need to reach voters with different messages, I guess. But I'm curious, and we've talked a little bit offline about where the digital targeting leads, because as I said, when we're talking about platforms, you start to get policies that are very niche targeted to attract voters, and in the same way that we might target for our clients to attract supporters on an issue and get them to speak out on an issue on our digital platforms. What does that end up doing in terms of what people see in their feeds, how much they see about what's happening from somebody else's perspective, and where does that lead?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it increasingly creates polarization, right? So in the public and in political discourse, and I think socially and culturally as well. And it's something that I think we've seen taken to an extreme in the United States, our friends, our neighbors south of the border, where they're not even having anything remotely close to a unified conversation when it comes to politics. And I think for sure there could be a fear that extremism or separation between where the parties stand and who they're speaking to, that could just continue to grow and the gap widens. But it's a slippery slope for sure, because on the one hand, parties now today have so much power. It used to be, if you were buying TV ads, you pick which TV stations based on who's likely to watch them, right? And then you started picking specific shows, and that was the next revolution, right?
Right.
You could tap right into an audience based on the type of show, who's likely to watch it, what demographic. Today, it's you can pick individuals, right? Maybe not specifically saying I want to target this person by name, but saying I want to target somebody in this riding that is interested in this, that has taken this particular action, that meets these series of criteria, that looks like someone using AI, machine learning, what have you, just like someone who's voted for me in the past, has an interest in, education or healthcare, and this is a specific message I want to give that person. And if that person is just seeing the campaign for the first time, they're only hearing what you want them to hear. And it's oftentimes just a sliver of what your overall message is or what your overall philosophy is as a government. So it can be a slippery slope in terms of that ability to micro-target and how much it's going to fragment the population as a result of that activity.
And I think it's not only what they're hearing, what you want them to hear as a political party, they're self-selecting that they're only hearing what they want to hear, which is part of my concern. It becomes self-fulfilling.
Totally.
So the algorithm that Facebook or Twitter or somebody's using that's following what I'm interested in or what I express about something starts to feed me stuff that they know is going to fit. And then I'm not seeing somebody else's perspective. We're not actually having an online debate about an issue. I'm only hearing that the other side's bad, my side's good, and it just reinforces itself.
And I mean, I'll keep it out of the Canadian context just because I think the US gives us a very clear example. But you look at Fox News versus CNN, these are not separate channels anymore that people are watching. These have become, they're pillars of separate ecosystems, I feel, right? So if you are engaged in watching Fox News, it's not just that you get your news from one place and not the other. It's now you're becoming a part of a community of hundreds or thousands of publications, opinionists, e-commerce stores, everything geared around the idea of the persona who's going to be in that ecosystem. So you're living in a world where it's not just about news consumption, it's about culturally where you align. It's about how you perceive sports, right? We've seen that with the NFL. It's about how you perceive athletes. That translates to, how do you perceive public funding in programs? And you start to develop these biases based on this sphere or this ecosystem that you're living in. And it's not something that you necessarily even opted into. It's that you started to engage with one piece of content, then you engage more regularly with that source, and then you got exposed to this widening net of similar information or material. And then it really reinforces itself because you start to share and engage. So your friends and your neighbors and people who you know personally, they see that engagement, and it starts to solidify that opinion around maybe your family or your friend or your peer group. So it's definitely a concern. I don't want to sound alarmist by any means, and I don't see the same type of evolution occurring in Canada, but it is a slippery slope, and it is quite easy for parties to go down that hole and say, well, I'm going to speak to people who I know are going to respond to this message and only speak to those people in this way. So having that ability, I think with great power comes great responsibility. And each of these parties, most of them are equipped with millions of dollars to spend to really manipulate the opinions of Canadians in their favor. So I don't know, maybe taking it full circle, that's a reason for party platforms or some transparency to come out sooner than later, so that at least those messages can be grounded and this is what we'll do on a policy perspective, from a policy
Speak to
perspective.
a broader set of issues
Exactly.
to all Canadians.
Yeah.
I think so. It's the targeting that of course we do a lot of as well. It's extremely effective, really cost effective. Lets campaigns who are only allowed to spend a finite amount of money focus that spend in a way that gets them a far greater yield than they can with mass media, and then spend their money on other things like getting out the vote and getting those very people to the polling stations that they need to get out on election day. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily foster a positive environment for the health of democracy is kind of my view, which is why I brought it up and thought that we should raise it, because it's an interesting topic and something to keep an eye on and have in the back of your mind as you're targeted with ads, as you're looking at how campaigns are doing what they're doing. So I think that's a good wrap for the first week, where we look at the launch, we look at where they're at in terms of platform rollout, and then the evolution of that digital targeting and what it means to the campaigns themselves, but also from a broader societal perspective. It's a fun one to debate. So thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'll just say for those watching, if you enjoy our show, make sure to download and install our new app. It's completely free for the duration of the election period. You can get it on the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store as well. Just search Election 43 and you can log in and get daily updates, insights, news, polls, tracking, social media coverage, and of course this show delivered right to your phone. So thanks for watching.
Thank you.